The fluorescent lights of Lou's diner flickered like dying stars, casting harsh shadows across cracked vinyl booths and a counter worn smooth by decades of desperate hands. Outside Wyoming, winter pressed against the windows in waves of frozen darkness. Inside, the clock above the register read 2:47 a.m., and Seraphina Thorne had been on her feet for 11 hours straight. Her lower back screamed with that familiar burn that no amount of stretching could touch anymore. The cheap sneakers she'd bought from the discount bin 3 months ago had worn through at the heels, and she could feel the cold floor through the cardboard she'd stuffed inside to make them last another few weeks. Her feet bled. They always bled by the end of her shifts, leaving faint, rust-colored stains in her socks that no amount of washing could fully remove. Sera wiped down the same section of counter. For the third time, her practiced smile long since faded into the blank expression of pure exhaustion. The diner was nearly empty. Old Lou sat in booth 4 nursing his coffee like it held the secrets of the universe, his weathered hands trembling slightly as they always did after midnight. A trucker named Dale had fallen asleep over his barely touched apple pie, his head tilted back against the booth, mouth open, snoring softly. This was her life at 26. Pouring coffee for strangers who never learned her name, smiling until her face ached, counting tips that never quite covered the overdue rent notice taped to her apartment door. She had 3 jobs now. This one, the night shift at Lou's. The cleaning service, she worked mornings scrubbing office toilets for executives who wouldn't look at her if they passed on the street. And the online transcription work she did on her laptop during the 4 hours between jobs that should have been sleep. It still wasn't enough. It was never enough. The medical bills from her father's death 8 years ago still arrived in their pale blue envelopes, each one stamped with increasingly aggressive red letters. $18,000 for a man who died anyway, who spent his last hours in a hospital bed holding her hand and apologizing. Apologizing because he couldn't afford the surgery that might have saved him. Apologizing because he was leaving her alone with Caspian, her younger brother, who was only 11 years old and didn't understand why Daddy wasn't coming home. Sera had been 18. She dropped out of community college the next week. Now Cass was 19, brilliant and beautiful, and desperate to make something of himself. He'd gotten into Princeton on a partial scholarship, but partial wasn't enough. $41,000 a year. She'd laughed when she saw the number, a sound like breaking glass. She made $22,000 a year across all 3 jobs. After rent, after utilities, after food and bus fare, and keeping Cass fed and clothed, there was nothing left. Less than nothing. The debt collectors called every day now. She'd learned to recognize their numbers, learned the exact tone of voice they used when they threatened legal action. She'd gotten good at negotiating payment plans, at pushing deadlines, at making promises she wasn't sure she could keep. 7 years of practice had made her an expert in desperation. Sera tucked a strand of honey blonde hair behind her ear and sighed. 3 more hours until her shift ended. Then home to her studio apartment where the heat barely worked and the neighbors fought until dawn. 4 hours of sleep if she was lucky. Then up at 10 to clean office buildings until 3 in the afternoon. Then transcription work until 6. Then back here to Lou's for another 11-hour shift. Her life was a wheel and she was trapped beneath it, crushed a little more each rotation. The bell above the door chimed. Sera looked up, her practiced smile already sliding into place, and felt the words die in her throat. The man who entered wasn't just tall. He was massive, easily 6'7", with shoulders so broad he had to angle them slightly to fit through the door frame. He wore black, expensive fabric that seemed to drink in the diner's harsh light, a long coat that moved like liquid shadow, boots that made no sound despite their obvious weight. Rain had been falling for hours, turning the streets outside into rivers of filth, but he was completely dry. Not a drop of water on his coat, his hair, his skin, as if the storm itself had parted around him out of reverence or fear. But it was his face that made Sera's breath catch. Pale skin stretched over aristocratic features that belonged in a museum displayed behind velvet ropes with a placard reading, "Do not touch." Sharp cheekbones that could cut glass. A jaw so perfectly defined it looked carved from marble. His hair was white blonde, pulled back from his face in a way that should have looked severe, but instead looked regal, ancient. And his eyes. God, his eyes. They were the palest silver Sera had ever seen, like mercury given form. Like moonlight concentrated into something solid and terrible and beautiful. They swept across the diner with the kind of awareness that suggested he saw everything, every detail, every crack in the foundation, every secret hidden in shadow. When those silver eyes landed on Sera, she felt pinned, like a butterfly under glass, like prey that had just realized the predator had been watching for far longer than she'd known. Heat crawled up her neck despite the diner's perpetual chill. The man moved with predatory grace, each step deliberate and utterly silent despite his size. Old Lou suddenly became very interested in his coffee mug, his trembling hands now shaking for an entirely different reason. Dale jerked awake with a start, took one look at the stranger and immediately ducked his head, suddenly fascinated by his congealed pie. The stranger slid into the corner booth, the one that had been empty all night because the vinyl was torn and the table wobbled and nobody wanted to sit there. He didn't look at the menu. He looked at Sera. She felt the weight of that silver gaze like a physical touch sliding over her tired body with an appreciation that made her skin flush. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. There was something about him that screamed danger in a language older than words. Every instinct she'd honed growing up in rough neighborhoods told her to run. But a different instinct, one buried deeper, whispered something else entirely. Stay. Sera grabbed her notepad and forced her legs to move. Her sneakers squeaked on the linoleum, obscenely loud in the sudden silence. She stopped at the edge of his booth and looked down at him, though looking down felt wrong. Even seated, he radiated a kind of power that made her feel small. Welcome to Lou's, her voice came out steadier than she felt. What can I get you, coffee? His voice was deep rough with an accent she couldn't place. Something Eastern European, old world, the kind that spoke of castles and centuries and things that didn't belong in a Wyoming diner at 3 in the morning. And whatever you recommend. Sera's pen hovered over her pad. The meatloaf's good, fresh today. One corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but something that suggested amusement. I'll trust your judgment. She should have walked away then, written down his order, and disappeared into the kitchen. Let someone else bring his food. But something about the way he watched her, patient and unwavering, made her hesitate. Are you passing through? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Something like that. Those mercurial eyes never left her face. I'm looking for something. Oh. Sera's throat went dry. Lost someone? Not lost. His head tilted slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her want to squirm. Searching. There's a difference. Well, I hope you find them. She forced a smile and turned away, but his voice stopped her. Seraphina. She spun back, her heart hammering. How did you know my name? He nodded toward her chest. She looked down at her name tag, felt her face burn with embarrassment. Right, of course. I'll get your coffee. She fled to the counter, her hands shaking as she poured. This was ridiculous. He was just a customer. Probably some wealthy businessman slumming it on the wrong side of town. Bored, looking for entertainment in poverty. But when she glanced back at him, he was still watching her. And the weight of his attention made every nerve ending in her body come alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. Maybe ever. Sera brought his coffee and meatloaf, setting them down with hands that trembled slightly. He caught her wrist as she turned away. His fingers were cold as ice despite the diner's warmth. The touch sent electricity racing up her arm. Join me. It wasn't a request. His thumb pressed against her racing pulse, feeling each frantic beat. I'm working. Her voice came out breathless. Your shift ends in 3 hours. His grip loosened but didn't release. I'll wait. You can't just sit here for 3 hours. Why not? His gaze held challenge and something deeper, something that made her stomach flip. I've waited longer for less important things. Sera pulled her hand free, rubbing her wrist where his chilled touch had branded her skin. You don't even know me. Not yet. But I will. There was such certainty in those 2 words that Sera felt her resistance crumble. This was insane. Dangerous. Every instinct she'd developed should be screaming at her to refuse to call the cops, to do anything except agree to spend time alone with a stranger who looked at her like she was prey. But that deeper instinct, the one that had been silent for so long, whispered yes. Fine. But I can't promise conversation. We might get busy. His smile was sharp and knowing. I doubt that very much. He was right. The next 3 hours crawled by with excruciating slowness, and the diner remained empty except for old Lou and Dale, both of whom left within the first hour, shooting nervous glances at the man in the corner booth. He sat perfectly still, barely touching his food, his coffee growing cold. Those argent eyes tracked Sera's every movement. She tried to ignore him, busied herself with cleaning, restocking anything, to avoid looking at him. But she felt his gaze like a physical touch sliding over her tired body, with an appreciation that made her skin flush hot, despite the diner's chill. When she finally hung up her apron at 6 a.m., her hands were shaking and her thighs were trembling with a tension that had nothing to do with exhaustion. The stranger stood as she approached, unfolding to his full imposing height. Up close, she could see details she'd missed before. The way his pale skin seemed to glow faintly in the pre-dawn light, the absolute stillness of his chest as if he didn't need to breathe, the faint scent that clung to him cold and clean, like winter forests and something else, something ancient. Seraphina. He said her name like a caress, each syllable weighted with meaning. Walk with me, it's almost dawn. She gestured toward the windows where the sky was beginning to lighten with streaks of pale gold. Don't you need to be somewhere? I need to be with you. The simple statement sent heat spiraling through her belly. And dawn is still an hour away. Plenty of time. Time for what? To talk. His eyes held promises that had nothing to do with conversation. To learn why a woman with your eyes works herself to exhaustion in a place like this. My eyes, Sera touched her face self-consciously, green like spring leaves after rain. He moved closer and she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Alive. Everything else about you is dead tired, worn down by this life you're living. But your eyes still hold hope, still believe something better exists. The observation cut too close to the bone. Sera wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly defensive. You don't know anything about me. I know you deserve more than this. His hand lifted, hesitating an inch from her face. May I? She should have said no. Should have walked away from this strange, intense man who looked at her like she was precious, like she mattered. But Sera found herself nodding, breath-catching, as his frigid fingers brushed her cheek. Come with me, just for an hour. Let me show you something. Show me what possibility. The word hung between them, weighted with promise. Sera's rational mind screamed danger, but her heart, her lonely, desperate heart, whispered yes. When was the last time anyone had looked at her like this? When was the last time she'd felt like anything other than a collection of debts and obligations and exhaustion? 1 hour. Her voice was barely a whisper. Then I need to sleep. His smile could have melted glaciers. 1 hour is enough to change everything. They walked through streets still wet from rain, past closed shops and sleeping buildings. He didn't speak, just moved beside her with that same predatory grace, his presence both comforting and terrifying. Sera's apartment was in the opposite direction, but she found herself following him anyway, drawn by a pull she couldn't name. They stopped at a building she'd passed 1,000 times but never really seen. It looked abandoned from the outside windows, dark ivy crawling up weathered stone like reaching fingers. But when he pushed open the heavy door, warm light spilled out, and Sera smelled something rich and intoxicating. Old books and candle wax and something indefinable that made her head swim. Inside was impossible. The exterior couldn't possibly contain the space that spread before her. A grand hall with vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadow. Marble floors polished to mirror brightness. Furnishings that belonged in a palace, all dark wood and velvet, and gold accents that caught the light from hundreds of candles burning in sconces along the walls. Paintings in heavy frames lined every surface, faces from centuries past watching with knowing eyes. Tapestries depicting battles and coronations and moments from history that Sera only half recognized. Sculptures that looked Greek, Roman, older. A suit of armor that had to be medieval standing guard beside a staircase that curved upward into darkness. What is this place? Sera breathed, her voice echoing in the vast space. Home. He closed the door behind them, and she heard the lock click with a finality that should have frightened her. My name is Lucian Ashford, and I need to tell you a truth that will change your life forever. Sera turned to face him, her back against the closed door, her heart hammered against her ribs. What truth? Lucian moved closer, his pewter eyes intense in the candlelight. Shadows played across his aristocratic features, making him look even more otherworldly, even more dangerous. I am not human. Each word fell like a stone into still water. I am vampire, 823 years old, and I rule the territories from Montana to Alaska with absolute authority. She should have laughed, should have run. This was insane. Vampires weren't real. They were stories, myths, things that existed in movies and books and the fevered imaginations of Gothic novelists. But looking at him, at the way shadows seemed to cling to his form like living things, at the stillness that wasn't quite death but wasn't quite life, at the pale skin that glowed with its own inner light, Sera found herself believing. Why tell me? Her voice shook. Because I need a wife. Lucian stepped closer, his massive frame dwarfing her. And you need strong sons. The declaration hung in the air between them, audacious and impossible. Sera's mind raced, trying to process what he'd just said. The words didn't make sense strung together like that. Wife. Sons. As if he was discussing a business transaction instead of something that should involve love, courtship, the normal progression of human relationships. But he wasn't human. He'd just told her that. I don't understand. The words came out small, lost in the vastness of the hall. Lucian stepped closer still until she could feel the cold radiating from his body like winter itself had taken human form. For 8 centuries I've lived alone, built an empire, crushed enemies, accumulated power and wealth beyond measure. But a king without an heir is vulnerable. Without a queen, without sons to carry my bloodline, everything I've built crumbles the moment I'm gone. So get married. Sera's voice gained strength, defensive. Have kids. Why me? He cupped her face thumb, tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. Because I've watched you for 6 months, seen your strength, your resilience. You work 3 bucks, send money to your brother at Princeton. Survive on scraps and dreams. You're 26 alone struggling. Society calls you a failure. Sera flinched, but he continued relentlessly, his quicksilver eyes boring into hers. But I see what they don't. Fire beneath exhaustion. Intelligence wasted on menial labor. A body made for pleasure and childbearing neglected and dismissed. You want more, Seraphina. You dream of security, of purpose, of being valued. His other hand settled on her waist and she felt the chill of his touch through her thin uniform. The cold should have repelled her. Instead, it made every nerve ending sing with awareness. I can give you everything. His voice dropped to a purr, wealth beyond imagination, a position of power, protection for you and everyone you love. Luxury comfort servants to tend your every need. All I ask in return is that you give me children, strong sons to inherit my throne, beautiful daughters to forge alliances. This is insane. Sera tried to pull away, but his grip tightened just enough to keep her in place. Not painful, but firm. Unbreakable. You can't just buy a wife. I'm not buying, I'm offering. Think about it, Seraphina. No more aching feet. No more counting pennies. No more sleeping in a freezing apartment while your landlord ignores your complaints. You'd live here in comfort. Your brother's tuition paid in full. Those medical bills from your father's death, gone. Every burden you carry lifted. How do you know about my family? The question came out sharper than intended, tinged with fear now. How long have you been watching me? I make it my business to know everything about the woman I intend to marry. The possessiveness in his tone should have frightened her. Instead, it sent heat pooling low in her belly, a response she didn't want to examine too closely. Sera looked up at this impossible man, this creature, and felt the careful walls she'd built around her heart begin to crack. She'd spent 8 years being strong, 8 years carrying burdens that would have broken most people, 8 years invisible to everyone except creditors and customers who snapped their fingers for more coffee. And here was someone who saw her, really saw her, who looked at her exhausted, worn-down body and called it beautiful, who wanted her not despite her poverty, but because her survival proved something he valued. And if I say no, she needed to know, needed to understand what kind of man, what kind of creature he really was. Then I'll let you walk away. His thumb brushed her lower lip, glacial and electrifying. But we both know you won't. You're drowning, Seraphina. Let me pull you out. She should have been offended, should have slapped him and stormed away. This was the most arrogant, presumptuous proposition she'd ever received. He was treating her like property, like something to be acquired and used. But every word he spoke was truth, cutting through her defenses with surgical precision. She was drowning. Had been for years. And no one had noticed. No one except this silver-eyed vampire who looked at her like she was treasure instead of trash. What would you expect from me? Her voice was barely a whisper. What are the terms? Lucian's smile was wicked, full of dark promise. Everything. Your body in my bed, carrying my children. Your presence at my side, ruling beside me. Your loyalty, your strength, your fire. He leaned down, his icy breath ghosting across her lips. And in return, I'll worship you, protect you, give you pleasure you've never imagined, make you a queen in every sense of the word. His mouth hovered inches from hers, and Sera could feel the pull between them, magnetic and terrifying. Her body responded without permission, leaning into his frozen frame, seeking contact she shouldn't want. I need time to think. The words took every ounce of willpower she possessed. You have until sunrise. His hand slid from her waist to her hip, possessive and burning cold through her clothes. After that, my offer expires. I'm not a patient man, Seraphina. 8 centuries haven't taught me to wait for what I want. And what do you want, you? In my bed, round with my child, wearing my crown. His voice roughened with desire. I want to strip away every layer of exhaustion and fear and show you what it means to be cherished. I want to hear you scream my name while I'm buried so deep inside you that you forget where you end and I begin. Sera's breath came in short gasps, her body responding to his words despite her mind's protests. This was happening too fast, too intense. But God, when was the last time anyone had wanted her like this? When had anyone seen her as more than a tired waitress, barely keeping her head above water 5 weeks? The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Give me 5 weeks to get to know you, to understand what this life would be. Then I'll give you my answer. Lucian's eyes flashed with something dangerous. 2 weeks. 4. 3. His smile was sharp as a blade. 3 weeks to convince you that you belong at my side. To show you pleasures that will make you forget the taste of poverty. To prove that strong sons aren't the only reason you'll beg to stay. You're very confident. Sera tried to sound defiant, but her voice came out breathy, affected. His hand fisted in her hair, tilting her head back with gentle but inexorable force. I can smell your desire, Seraphina. Hear your heart racing, feel the heat between your thighs. Your body has already decided. Now we just need to convince your mind. Then you'd better make these 3 weeks count. Lucian's laugh was dark and promising. Oh, I intend to. Starting now. His mouth claimed hers with devastating hunger. Frost-touched lips moved against hers with centuries of experience, taking and demanding and giving all at once. Sera gasped at the shock of it, the wrongness of cold where there should be heat, and he took advantage, his tongue sweeping in to taste her. She should have pulled away, should have maintained some distance, some semblance of control. But her hands fisted in his expensive shirt, pulling him closer as heat and ice collided. His kiss was nothing like the fumbling encounters of her early 20s before poverty and responsibility had killed any interest in romance. This was mastery, possession, a claiming that left no doubt about his intentions. When he finally released her, Sera was trembling, her lips swollen and her mind spinning. 3 weeks. She barely recognized her own voice. Every night you're mine. Lucian's thumb traced her jaw, a gesture both tender and possessive. I'll send a car to pick you up after your shift. We'll spend the hours between midnight and dawn together, learning each other. I still have to work. Reality crashed back in, unwelcome but necessary. I can't just abandon my jobs. Not anymore. His tone brooked no argument. As of this moment, you're under my protection. That means you don't serve coffee to drunks at 3 a.m. You don't clean toilets for executives who wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire. You rest, you learn, and you prepare for the life that's waiting. I can't just quit. Panic edged into her voice. I have bills. Cass depends on me. Consider it done. I've already purchased Lou's Diner. Your boss will receive a generous severance. Your coworkers will all find better positions. And you will never set foot in that place again unless you choose to. As for your bills, check your phone. Sera pulled out her cracked smartphone with shaking hands. The screen lit up with notification after notification. Bank transfers, payments processed, debts cleared, her medical bills. Gone. Her overdue rent, paid through the end of the year, and a deposit in her checking account that made her eyes water. $120,000. Her legs gave out. Lucian caught her easily lifting her as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. The cold of him should have been uncomfortable. Instead, it felt like relief after years of burning. How? She stared at the numbers on her screen, convinced they would disappear if she blinked. How did you do this so fast, I told you? I'm a king. That's what being a king means. Anything I want, I acquire. Anyone who stands in my way, I remove. Money is just numbers on a screen, Seraphina. Power is what matters. And I have more power than you can imagine. She should have been angry at his arrogance. Instead, she felt a thrill race through her. This was power, real power, and he was offering to share it, offering to give her a life where she wasn't constantly afraid, constantly exhausted, constantly one missed payment away from losing everything. The sun will rise soon. Lucian gestured toward a doorway she hadn't noticed before, ornate wood carved with symbols she couldn't read. There's a room prepared for you. Rest today. Tonight your education begins. Education in what? What it means to be mine. His smile promised dark delights. Sleep well, little queen. You'll need your strength. He carried her up the grand staircase through corridors lined with more art and tapestries and evidence of wealth accumulated over centuries. Finally, he stopped at a door and pushed it open with one hand still holding her with the other. The bedroom beyond stole her breath. It was larger than her entire apartment. The bed was enormous, draped in silk that looked like it cost more than her yearly salary. A bathroom connected, all marble and gold, with a tub big enough to swim in, walk-in closet, sitting area with a fireplace, windows with heavy curtains blocking the approaching dawn. Everything you need is here. Lucian set her down gently on the bed. The mattress was so soft she nearly sank into it, and the sheets felt like water against her skin. Sleep. Tonight everything changes. He left, closing the door softly behind him. The lock didn't click. He was giving her the choice to leave. The thought was somehow more terrifying than if he'd locked her in. Sera stood in the center of the opulent room, her cheap uniform jarring against the luxury surrounding her. Her reflection in the floor-length mirror showed a woman she barely recognized. Blonde hair tangled from his fingers, lips swollen from his kiss, eyes bright with possibility and fear, and something else she didn't want to name. 3 weeks to decide if she wanted to be a vampire's queen. 3 weeks to choose between grinding poverty and impossible wealth. 3 weeks to discover if strong suns and burning desire were enough to build a life on. Sera stripped off her uniform, letting it fall to the floor. The threadbare fabric looked obscene against the plush carpet. She left it there, a discarded skin from a life she might never return to, and slid between sheets that cost more than she made in a month. As sleep claimed her, she could still feel the ghost of Lucien's wintry touch on her skin, could still taste him on her lips. When she woke, everything would change. The waitress would begin her transformation into a queen. And Seraphina Thorne would learn that sometimes the most dangerous decisions were the ones that felt most like coming home. She woke to twilight in the scent of jasmine. Sera stretched in the enormous bed, her body more rested than it had been in years. Every muscle felt loose, relaxed. For the first time in recent memory, her feet didn't ache. For a moment, she thought it had all been a dream. The vampire king, the impossible offer, the kiss that had set her soul on fire. Then she saw the dress laid out on the chair beside the bed, and reality crashed back. It was beautiful. Deep emerald green that would bring out her eyes, made of fabric so fine it seemed to shimmer in the low light. Beside it, shoes that actually looked like they'd fit properly, cushioned insoles visible. And jewelry that had to be real, based on the weight of the stones. A necklace of emeralds and diamonds, matching earrings. A bracelet that caught the light and threw green fire across the walls. A note rested on top, written in elegant script that belonged to another century. Wear this tonight. A car will arrive at 8. Do not keep me waiting. Sera's hands shook as she picked up the dress. This was real. All of it. She'd agreed to 3 weeks with a vampire king who wanted to make her his queen, who wanted her to bear his children, who'd looked at her like she was precious instead of disposable. The bathroom was even more impressive in the evening light. She filled the massive tub, adding oils that smelled of roses and vanilla from crystal bottles on the shelf. The water was so hot, it turned her skin pink, and she sank into it with a groan of pure pleasure. As she soaked, Sera's mind raced with questions. What did Lucien mean by education? What would tonight involve? What was she doing agreeing to any of this? She should call Cass, tell him where she was. But what would she say? Hey, little brother, I met a vampire who wants to marry me, and I'm seriously considering it. But beneath the fear was something else. Excitement. For the first time in 8 years, Sera felt alive. Felt like something was happening to her instead of to her. Lucien had looked at her like she mattered, like she was special. When was the last time anyone had made her feel wanted instead of tolerated? She dried off and slipped into the dress. It fit perfectly, hugging her curves in ways that made her look powerful instead of tired. The woman in the mirror wasn't a waitress anymore. She looked expensive, cared for, beautiful. Sera barely recognized herself. At exactly 8 p.m., there was a soft knock on her door. She opened it to find a woman waiting, elegant and composed, with dark hair coiled at her nape and eyes that caught the light wrong. Like they reflected too much, like something predatory lurked behind the civilized facade. Miss Thorne, the woman's smile was polite but cool. I'm Katerina, Mr. Ashford's assistant. If you're ready, the car's waiting. Sera followed her down the grand staircase, through hallways lit with candles that shouldn't still be burning after 12 hours, and out to where a sleek black car idled at the curb. Not a limousine, something more subtle, a sedan that probably cost more than most houses. The driver opened her door, and she slid into leather seats that felt like butter against her skin. Where are we going? Sera asked as they pulled away from the mansion. Katerina smiled from the front seat. To learn what it means to be a queen. The drive took them out of the city into hills Sera had only seen from a distance. Mansions dotted the landscape, each more impressive than the last, until they turned through gates that looked like they guarded a fortress. Iron worked into intricate patterns. Security cameras hidden among decorative elements. Guards in booths who nodded as the car passed. The estate that spread before them was breathtaking. Airs of manicured gardens even in winter. Fountains that glowed with underwater lights. And at the center, a manor that could have housed 100 people. Every window blazed with warm light, and Sera could see figures moving inside. This is where he lives. This is where you'll live, Katerina corrected. If you accept his offer. The car stopped at the main entrance, and Sera stepped out onto stones that had been here for centuries. The door opened before she could knock, and a butler who looked almost as old as Lucienne bowed deeply. Miss Thorne, welcome to Ashford Manor. The master is waiting in the East Salon. Sera followed him through rooms that took her breath away. Art that belonged in museums. Furniture that kings had owned. Everywhere evidence of wealth and power and centuries of careful accumulation. Ancient weapons mounted on walls. Tapestries depicting battles from wars she'd studied in high school. A library visible through open doors, walls lined with books in dozens of languages. Lucian stood by a massive fireplace staring into flames that couldn't possibly warm his frigid flesh. He'd changed into formal attire, all black, except for a deep red shirt that made his pale skin seem to glow. When he turned, his sterling eyes caught her like a hook, and Sera felt her breath stop. Seraphina. He crossed to her in 3 long strides, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. The kiss burned cold against her knuckles. You're even more beautiful than I remembered. You've only been gone 12 hours. The words came out more breathless than she intended. 12 hours too long. His gaze traveled over her, possessive and hungry. The dress suits you. Green is definitely your color. You have good taste. I have excellent taste. His smile was wicked. That's why I chose you. Sera felt heat rise in her cheeks. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be flirted with. To have a man, a creature, look at her with open desire instead of pity or dismissal. You wanted to educate me. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, though her heart hammered against her ribs. What's tonight's lesson? Lucian's smile widened, showing just a hint of fang. Tonight you learn what it means to be desired by a king. He led her deeper into the manor through a doorway hidden behind a tapestry downstairs that spiraled into darkness. Sera's heart hammered with each step, but Lucien's hand on the small of her back kept her moving forward. Not pushing, just guiding, reminding her that she could turn back at any moment. She didn't turn back. They emerged into a room that stole her breath. It was enormous, decorated in shades of deep red and black, with a bed at its center that could have slept 5 people. Candles burned everywhere, hundreds of them, casting dancing shadows across silk and velvet, and on every surface flowers. Roses in blood red, orchids in pale cream, lilies that perfumed the air with their intoxicating scent. This is your room. Lucien's voice was low, intimate. When you're ready, when you accept my offer. This is where you'll sleep, where I'll worship your body every night, where you'll conceive the sons I need. Sera moved into the room, touching the silk bed curtains, the soft furs draped across chairs. Everything was luxury, decadence, a far cry from her studio apartment with its broken heater and stained carpet. You're trying to seduce me. She said it plainly, without accusation. Just fact. Yes. Lucian moved behind her, his massive frame radiating cold that somehow felt inviting. Is it working, maybe? Sera turned to face him, tilting her head back to meet his eyes. But seduction isn't the same as love. I never promised you love. His hand settled on her waist, pulling her against his hard body. I promised you pleasure, security, power. Love is a human weakness I abandoned centuries ago. Then what do you feel for me? Lucian's hand slid lower, cupping her rear and pulling her tight against him. She could feel his arousal, hard and insistent, even through their clothes. The evidence of his desire sent molten heat through her veins. Hunger, need, the desire to possess you so completely that the thought of another man touching you makes me want to burn the world. His mouth brushed her ear, chilled lips against fevered skin. I want to mark every inch of your skin, fill you with my seed until your belly swells. Hear you beg for more when I've already driven you to exhaustion. Sera's breath came in short gasps, her body responding even as her mind screamed caution. You think you can just tell me what you want and I'll submit? I think you've been alone so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to be wanted. His hand fisted in her hair, gentle but firm, tilting her head back. I think you're tired of being strong, of carrying burdens no one helps you shoulder. I think you want to surrender, to let someone else take control. His words cut too deep, exposing truths she'd hidden even from herself. Sera had been strong her whole life. Had to be. After her mother left when she was 12, after her father died when she was 18, after she became the only thing standing between Cass and foster care. She'd been strong because she had no choice. But God, she was exhausted. And the idea of letting someone else carry the weight, even for a moment, was seductive beyond measure. And if I do surrender, Her voice came out small. If I let you have what you want, Lucian's smile was pure sin. Then I'll give you everything you've ever dreamed of, and pleasures you've never imagined. His mouth claimed hers again, and this time Sera didn't hesitate. She kissed him back, and with all the pent-up loneliness and desire she'd been suppressing for years. His tongue swept against hers, arctic and demanding, and she moaned into his mouth, her hands clutching at his shoulders. The mating ritual demanded ceremony, not urgency. Lucian guided her to the bed with reverence, as if she were something holy rather than claimed. The crimson silk seemed to glow in the candlelight, thousands of flames creating shadows that danced across ancient stone. He removed his formal attire with deliberate slowness, each layer revealing more of the immortal warrior beneath. In the ritual candlelight, his body looked carved from pale marble, a weapon honed across 8 centuries now offered in devotion rather than conquest. Tonight I don't just take. His voice held something new, something vulnerable beneath the hunger. Tonight I worship. Tonight I bind myself to you as completely as you bind yourself to me. He reached for the hem of her dress, and reality crashed back into Sera like cold water. Her hands shot out, catching his wrists. Wait, her voice shook. This is too fast. Lucian went still, his eyes locked on hers. You want me. It wasn't a question. I can smell it. Hear your heart racing. Feel how wet you are for me. I barely know you. Sera sat up, pulling her dress back down with shaking hands. You can't just expect me to fall into bed with you because you're rich and powerful. Can I? His smile was sharp, knowing most women would have already been naked and begging. I'm not most women. No, something shifted in Lucian's expression. Respect mixing with desire, creating something even more dangerous. You're not, which is exactly why I chose you. He stood, running a hand through his white blonde hair, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost frustrated, almost human. You're right, I'm moving too fast. 823 years of getting exactly what I want the moment I want it has made me impatient. Sera relaxed, slightly relieved he wasn't going to push. Thank you. But I want you to understand something. Lucian leaned down, his hands bracing on either side of her head, caging her in without touching her. These 3 weeks aren't about me proving I'm worthy of you. They're about showing you what life as my queen entails. The pleasure, yes, but also the power, the responsibility, the danger. Danger, the word came out smaller than she intended. I have enemies. Lucian's expression hardened. Rivals who would love nothing more than to destroy me through the woman I've chosen. If you accept my offer, your life will never be simple again. You'll always need to be vigilant, always aware of the threats that surround us. Then maybe you should choose someone who's used to that life. Sera's voice was small and certain. I'm just a waitress. You're a survivor. Lucian's hand cupped her face with surprising gentleness. You've navigated poverty, kept your family afloat, worked yourself to the bone without breaking. That strength is worth more to me than any pampered aristocrat who's never known hardship. He kissed her forehead, chaste and almost tender. Come, let me show you the rest of the estate. Let me prove that I can be patient when it matters. They spent the next hours exploring his world. Lucian showed her the library walls lined with books in dozens of languages, some so old they crumbled at a touch. First editions of works she'd only read in cheap paperback. Manuscripts written by hand before the printing press existed. He pulled down a volume and opened it carefully, showing her illuminated pages painted by medieval monks. This was created in 1247. His fingers traced the gilded letters with reverence. I was already 200 years old when this was made. I've watched empires rise and fall, Seraphina, seen humanity evolve from feudalism to this modern age. And through it all, I've been alone. The loneliness in his voice was so profound, it made her chest ache. He showed her the art gallery filled with masterpieces he'd collected over centuries. A Rembrandt hanging beside a Picasso. A sculpture that looked Greek, all perfect marble bodies frozen in eternal grace. A painting so old the signature was illegible, but the skill evident in every brushstroke. I knew the man who painted this. Lucian gestured to a portrait of a woman in medieval dress. He died of plague in 1348. I tried to save him by turning him, but he refused. Said he'd rather die human than live forever as a monster. Do you think you're a monster? Sera studied his profile, the sharp lines of his face illuminated by gallery lights. I think I've done monstrous things. His pale eyes met hers. But I've also protected thousands, built communities, saved lives when I could. Morality isn't simple when you live as long as I have. He showed her the music room where instruments she couldn't name sat waiting to be played. A harpsichord that looked like it belonged in a museum. A violin so old and precious it rested in a glass case. Modern instruments too, a grand piano, guitars, drums. Do you play? Sera touched the piano keys, gently producing a soft chime. All of them. Lucian's smile was almost shy. You have centuries to fill. You learn things. And everywhere, servants who bowed to him with reverence that bordered on worship. They looked at Sera with curiosity and something else she couldn't quite identify. Envy. Fear, hope. How many people work for you? Sera asked as they walked through gardens that glowed with strategically placed lights even in winter. In this estate alone, about 50. But my holdings stretch across 3 countries. Businesses, properties, investments. I employ thousands. And they all know what you are. The important ones do. Lucian's hands settled on her lower back, guiding her toward a fountain where water danced in crystalline arcs despite the freezing temperature. The rest think I'm an eccentric billionaire who prefers night hours. Only my inner circle knows the truth. They stopped beside the fountain, and Lucien turned her to face him. Sera's pulse jumped at the intensity in his argent gaze. I need to know something. His voice was serious, stripped of the seductive purr he'd been using all night. Can you handle this, the isolation, the secrecy, the knowledge that you'll outlive every human you know? Outlive? Sera's breath caught. What do you mean if you become my wife, I'll turn you? Make you like me. Immortal. Powerful. Perfect. His hands framed her face. You'll never age, never sicken, never die. But you'll watch everyone from your old life fade away. Your brother, friends. They'll all become dust while you remain. The reality of what he was offering hit Sera like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on the wealth and security that she hadn't fully considered the cost. Immortality. Living forever while everyone she loved grew old and died. I don't know, her honesty felt important. I don't know if I'm strong enough for that. You are. Lucian's certainty was absolute. But you need to be sure. Because once you're turned, there's no going back. You'll be mine forever in every sense of the word. Forever is a long time, yes. His thumb traced her lower lip. But I've been alone for 8 centuries, Seraphina. I'm tired of empty beds and meaningless encounters. I want a partner. A queen. A woman who can stand beside me and rule with strength and grace. And sons. Don't forget the sons you need. Strong sons. His smile returned wicked and promising. Who you'll carry in your perfect body. Who I'll create by spending hours worshiping you. Learning every sound you make. Every way to make you come apart in my arms. Heat pooled low in Sera's belly despite her best intentions. The way he talked about it, raw and explicit, but somehow still romantic, made her thighs clench with need. You're doing it again. She tried to sound stern but failed, using seduction instead of logic. Because seduction works. His mouth brushed her ear, glacial lips sending shivers down her spine. I can hear your heartbeat speeding up. Smell the arousal dampening your thighs. Feel the way you lean into me even as you protest. His hand slid down her spine, pulling her flush against his hard body. Sera gasped at the contact, feeling every inch of his massive frame pressed against her softer curves. The evidence of his desire was unmistakable, hard and insistent against her stomach. But you're right. Lucian's lips grazed her neck, frost-touched and burning at once. We have 3 weeks. No need to rush. What will you want? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Everything. The word was a promise and a threat. Your submission, your pleasure, your body writhing beneath mine as I take you in every way possible. Sera's knees went weak, and only his arms kept her upright. This was insane. She should run, should get as far from this dangerous, seductive vampire as possible. But instead, she heard herself whisper, "Show me more." Lucian's laugh was dark and triumphant. "As you wish, little queen." He led her back inside, but instead of returning to the bedroom, he took her to a different wing of the manor. These corridors were darker, lit only by occasional sconces that cast more shadow than light. The air felt different here, heavier, charged with something ancient and powerful. They stopped at a door carved with symbols that made Sera's eyes hurt if she looked at them too long. Lucian placed his palm against the wood and she heard locks clicking open. Multiple locks, heavy ones. Beyond this point lies the true heart of my world. His voice was grave. What I'm about to show you, very few humans have ever seen. Once you cross this threshold, there's no pretending anymore. No going back to ignorance. Sera's heart hammered. Part of her wanted to refuse, to maintain some distance from this world of shadows and immortality. But a larger part, the part that had already started to crave his wintry touch and quicksilver eyes, needed to see, needed to understand what she was truly choosing. Show me. The door swung open and Lucian led her down another staircase, this one carved from raw stone. The temperature dropped with each step until Sera's breath misted in the air. The walls were old, not just old like the manor, ancient, like they'd been here before humans built cities, before civilization existed. They emerged into a cavern that shouldn't exist beneath a Montana estate. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above. The floor was smooth stone polished by centuries of feet, and in the center a circle of 12 stone chairs arranged around a table carved from a single piece of obsidian. This is the council chamber. Lucian's voice echoed in the vast space. Where I meet with the other territorial lords to govern our kind. Where laws are made and broken. Where justice is dispensed. How often do you meet once a season? His hand guided her closer to the table. We maintain order, settle disputes, deal with rogues who threaten exposure. It's not glamorous, Seraphina. It's politics and paperwork and endless negotiations. But it's necessary. Sera touched one of the stone chairs, felt the cold seep into her fingers. Each chair had a symbol carved into its back. She recognized none of them. These represent the 12 territories of North America. Lucian pointed to each in turn. I control 4. Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, and Alaska. The Northern Territories. 3 other lords are my allies. The remaining 5 would kill me if they thought they could get away with it. Why don't they try? Because I'm stronger, older, more ruthless. His smile held no warmth. I've survived 8 centuries by being smarter and more brutal than anyone who challenges me. They fear me, Seraphina. And fear keeps the peace better than love ever could. A woman appeared from the shadows so suddenly that Sera gasped. She was stunning in the way that hurt to look at. Tall, elegant, with dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and eyes like frozen amber. She wore a dress that probably cost more than Sera's car, what little she had of one, and moved with the same predatory grace as Lucien. My lord. The woman's voice was silk over steel. I didn't realize we were entertaining guests tonight. Vivian, Lucien's tone cooled noticeably. Allow me to introduce Seraphina Thorne, my intended queen. Vivian's amber eyes swept over Sera with barely concealed contempt, taking in every detail of her appearance and finding it wanting. Your intended queen, a human for now. Lucien's hand settled possessively on Sera's waist. In 3 weeks, she'll be one of us. If she chooses to accept my offer? If. Vivian's smile was sharp and icy. How many humans have you made that offer to my Lord 3-4, and yet I see no queen standing beside you? The temperature in the cavern dropped another 10 degrees. Lucien's expression went blank, which was somehow more frightening than anger would have been. Those women were weak. They couldn't handle the transformation. But Seraphina is different. Is she? Vivian circled Sera like a shark scenting blood. She looks just as fragile as the others. Just as temporary. That's enough. Lucien's voice cracked like a whip. Vivian's smile never wavered, but she stopped circling. You overstepped, Blackthorn. Forgive me, my lord. Vivian's tone dripped with false contrition. I merely seek to protect your interests. After all, I've served as your advisor for 6 centuries. I would hate to see you disappointed again. Your concern is noted. Lucien's hand tightened on Sera's waist. Now leave us. Vivian bowed a mockery of deference and melted back into the shadows. But not before Sera caught the hatred burning in those amber eyes. This woman wasn't just concerned. She was furious, and the target of that fury was Sera herself. When they were alone again, Sera found her voice. She doesn't like me. Lucien's expression softened slightly. Vivian has been angling to become my queen for 200 years. Your presence frustrates her plans. Is she dangerous? Very. His honesty was almost refreshing. But so are you, Seraphina. You just don't know it yet. I'm a waitress from Wyoming. I'm not dangerous to anyone. You're wrong. Lucian turned her to face him, his pewter eyes intense. You're dangerous because you make me feel things I thought I'd forgotten. Hope, desire, the need for connection. That makes you the most dangerous creature in my world. He kissed her again, slower this time. Less demanding, but somehow more intimate. When he pulled back, Sera was breathless. It's late, almost dawn. I need to return you to the manor before the sun rises. What happens if you're caught in sunlight I burn? His smile was grim. Not immediately, not like the legends say, but prolonged exposure would eventually kill me. Slowly, painfully. They climbed back up the stone stairs through the corridors and out to where the car still waited. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Lucian helped her into the car, his touch lingering. Tomorrow night, his voice held promise. I'll show you more. The drive back to the mansion was quiet. Katerina said nothing and Sera was grateful. Her mind was spinning with everything she'd seen, everything she'd learned. The wealth, the power, the danger. Vivian's hatred. Lucian's loneliness. The impossible choice he was asking her to make. When they reached the mansion, Sera stumbled up to her room and collapsed on the bed, still wearing the emerald dress. Sleep claimed her instantly, and she dreamed of silver eyes and cold kisses, and forever stretching out before her like an endless winter night. She woke to her phone buzzing. The screen showed Cass's name and a Princeton area code. Sera's heart clenched with guilt as she answered. Chioi. Her brother's voice was bright with excitement. You won't believe what happened. What Sera struggled to sit up, her voice still rough with sleep. Someone paid my tuition, all of it, for all 4 years. Princeton sent me an email this morning. They said an anonymous donor covered everything. Sera's throat tightened. She could see her reflection in the mirror across the room. Expensive dress rumpled, hair tangled, lips still slightly swollen from Lucian's kisses. That's amazing, Cass. I'm so happy for you. Chi, do you know anything about this? There was suspicion in his voice now. The donation came through yesterday. Right when you said you got that new job, I don't know anything. The lie tasted bitter. Maybe it's the billionaire I'm working for. Maybe he believes in supporting education. Maybe. Cass didn't sound convinced. Chi, are you okay? You sound different. I'm fine, just tired. The new job is demanding. They talked for a few more minutes, Cass sharing details about his classes and new friends, Sera making appropriate sounds while her mind wandered. When she finally hung up, she stared at her reflection and barely recognized the woman looking back. 3 weeks ago, she'd been drowning. Now she was being offered a lifeline that came with teeth and cold kisses and an eternity of darkness. The second week began with Sera moving into Ashford Manor permanently. Lucian had an entire wardrobe delivered to her room, designer clothes in her exact size, shoes that actually fit, jewelry that made her old costume pieces look like children's toys. You need a new wardrobe. Lucian had said that first evening, standing in her doorway as she tried to make the bed she'd slept in. Everything you own speaks of poverty. As my potential queen, you need to look the part. I like my clothes, Sera had protested weakly, but even she could see how shabby her favorite jeans looked against the silk sheets. Keep them if they bring you comfort. His smile had been understanding. But where would I provide when we're in public? Appearance matters in my world. He'd been right, of course. The first time Sera wore one of the new dresses, a deep blue number that hugged her curves and made her skin glow, she'd caught sight of herself in a mirror and barely recognized the elegant woman staring back. That's better. Lucien's approval had been evident in his eyes. Now you look like you belong here. The days fell into a pattern. Sera slept late, her body finally getting the rest it had been denied for years. She explored the vast estate, learning its secrets and rhythms. She ate meals prepared by chefs who made food she'd only ever dreamed of. Rich sauces, perfectly cooked meats, desserts that melted on her tongue like edible art. And every night Lucien educated her. One evening he took her to an underground club she would never have known existed. They descended into a basement beneath what looked like an abandoned warehouse and emerged into a space that pulsed with dark energy. Vampires. Dozens of them. Moving through shadows like liquid darkness. And humans. Willing humans who offered their throats with expressions of ecstasy. Sera watched horrified and fascinated as a beautiful immortal woman sank fangs into a young man's neck. He didn't scream, didn't struggle. Instead, he arched into her embrace, his face twisted in pleasure so intense it looked painful. This is part of our world. Lucien's voice was calm, factual, his hand steady on Sera's lower back. We need blood to survive. Some vampires take it by force, but I prefer consent. These humans come here knowing what they're offering, and in exchange we give them pleasure beyond anything they've experienced. Sera watched another vampire feed this one, a man with dark hair and eyes like night. The woman in his arms trembled and gasped as his mouth worked at her throat. When he pulled away, the wounds were already healing, leaving only faint marks. It should have been grotesque. Instead, it was strangely erotic. Have you ever... Sera couldn't finish the question, but Lucien understood. Fed from a human many times, his hand slid possessively around her waist, but not recently. I've been waiting. Waiting for what? For you. His sterling gaze met hers. For the right one. When you're ready. When you trust me enough to let me taste you. What's it like? Her voice came out breathless. Intimate, more than sex, more than anything. His mouth brushed her ear. When I bite you, you'll feel pleasure that makes everything else pale in comparison. You'll understand why these humans offer themselves willingly. Sera shivered, and not from cold. The idea of Lucien's fangs piercing her throat, of him drinking from her while she surrendered completely, sent heat spiraling through her body. Not yet. Lucien's voice held dark promise. But soon. Another night he showed her his business empire. Took her to boardrooms where CEOs twice her age trembled when he spoke. She watched him dismantle a competitor with 3 sentences, his voice never rising, but his power absolute. This is what it means to rule. He'd told her afterward, his arm around her shoulders as they left the building. Every decision affects thousands of lives. Every weakness can be exploited. You must be strong, certain, ruthless when necessary. I don't know if I can be ruthless. You already are. Lucien had pulled her close, his frigid body a strange comfort. You survived poverty that would have broken weaker people. You made hard choices to keep your family afloat. That's ruthlessness, Seraphina. Just aimed at survival instead of conquest. But it was the physical lessons that slowly undid her. Lucien kept his word about not rushing her into bed, but that didn't mean he kept his hands to himself. Each night he pushed her boundaries a little further, teaching her body to crave his gelid touch. One evening he'd kissed her until she was breathless, his mouth moving from her lips to her throat. His fangs scraped against her skin, not piercing, but promising. Sera had gasped at the sensation, her body arching into him involuntarily. You want me to bite you? It wasn't a question. No, but even she could hear the lie in her voice. Your body doesn't know how to lie, little queen. Lucien's hand had cupped her breast through her dress, his thumb circling her hardened peak. Every time I touch you, you get wet. Every time I kiss you, you moan. Soon you'll be begging me to take you. I won't beg. We'll see. Another night he'd stripped her down to her undergarments, his silver eyes drinking in every curve and dip of her body. Sera had stood before him in the candlelit bedroom, trembling with desire and vulnerability as his icy hands mapped her skin. Perfect. He'd breathed, his fingers tracing the underswell of her breast, the curve of her waist, the flare of her hips. Made for bearing strong sons, made for my hands, my mouth, my need. His mouth had closed over her peak, through the lace of her bra, arctic and burning at once. Sera had cried out, her hands fisting in his white blonde hair. He'd worked her methodically, sucking and licking, until she was writhing, until her undergarments were soaked with desire, until she was seconds from begging him to finish what he'd started. Then he'd stopped. Not yet. His voice had been rough with barely controlled hunger. When I take you for the first time, it won't be rushed. It will be everything, Seraphina. Hours of worship, your body marked and claimed, my seed deep inside you where it belongs. Sera had nearly wept with frustration, her body screaming for release he wouldn't give. Please. The word had slipped out before she could stop it. Lucien's smile had been triumphant. Soon, little queen. Very soon. Now, halfway through her second week, Sera stood in Lucien's study watching him work. He sat behind a massive desk of dark wood, reviewing documents with inhuman speed, occasionally making notes in that elegant script. Even doing something as mundane as paperwork, he looked powerful, untouchable. You're staring. He didn't look up from his papers. I'm thinking about this life. Sera moved to the window, looking out over the estate. A week ago, I was pouring coffee at 3 a.m. Now I'm living in a mansion, wearing designer clothes, learning to be a vampire's queen. Regrets? She considered the question honestly. No, not really. It's overwhelming, but it's not bad. But Lucien set down his pen, giving her his full attention. But I still don't understand why me. Sera turned to face him. You could have anyone, women who grew up in this world, who understand your culture and politics. Why choose a broke waitress? He stood moving around the desk with that predatory grace she'd come to crave. Because those women are boring. They know how to navigate society, yes, but they're empty. No fire, no passion, no real strength. He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his mercurial gaze. You fascinate me, Seraphina. Your resilience, your determination, the way you haven't let this world break you even when it tried. That's what I need. Not a doll who knows which fork to use, but a warrior who can stand beside me and rule. I'm not a warrior. You are. His certainty was absolute. You just haven't realized it yet. His mouth claimed hers, and Sera melted into him, her body remembering all the ways he'd taught it to respond. His tongue swept against hers, glacial and demanding, and she moaned, pressing closer. The hardness of his arousal against her stomach made her core clench with need. Lucien's hand slid down to cup her rear, lifting her easily and setting her on the edge of his desk. Documents scattered to the floor, forgotten as he stepped between her thighs. The pressure of him against her center, even through layers of clothing, made Sera gasp. Tell me you want this. His voice was rough against her skin as his mouth traced her throat. Tell me you're ready to be mine. Yes. The word tumbled out before rational thought could intervene. God, yes. His hands were already working at her dress, pulling it up and over her head, leaving her in just her undergarments. Lucian pulled back to look at her, his argent eyes blazing with hunger that made her feel powerful and desired and seen. Beautiful. He breathed, his chilled fingers tracing the lace covering her breasts. So fucking perfect. Mine. His mouth closed over her peak, sucking hard through the fabric, and Sera cried out, her fingers tangling in his hair. He worked her methodically, thoroughly, alternating between her breasts until she was writhing on his desk, her hips seeking friction he wouldn't give. Please. She heard herself beg, all pride abandoned. Lucien, please. Not yet. His voice held dark amusement even as his hand slid between her thighs, cupping her through soaked lace. You're not ready. I am. I'm so ready. Please, you need to surrender completely. His fingers found her swollen center through the fabric, circling with maddening precision. You need to accept what you are, what we'll be together. What are we? Sera's voice was barely recognizable, thick with need. His fingers slipped beneath the lace, touching her directly for the first time. The shock of frost against her heated flesh made her cry out. You're my queen, my mate, the mother of my children. His fingers worked her expertly, finding every sensitive spot as if he'd mapped her body across lifetimes. And I'm your king, your master, the one who will own every inch of your body and soul. Yes, Sera was beyond restraint, beyond thought. Yes to all of it. Then tomorrow night we seal our bond. Lucian's smile was wicked and triumphant as he brought her to the edge and held her there. No more waiting, no more restraint. Tomorrow you become mine in every way that matters. He pulled his hand away and Sera actually whimpered at the loss. Her body was on fire, desperate for release he refused to give. Tonight you learn patience. His silver eyes gleamed with dark promise. Tomorrow I'll teach you ecstasy. The final night of her third week arrived with a mixture of terror and anticipation that left Sera's hands shaking as she prepared herself. Katerina had delivered a white dress that looked like something between a wedding gown and a nightgown. Sheer enough to reveal every curve, but elegant enough to seem bridal. Tonight changes everything. The assistant had said, her expression carefully neutral. After tonight, there's no going back. Sera had nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd spent the past 3 weeks learning Lucien's world, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. In a few hours, she would surrender completely, become his mate, allow him to turn her into a vampire, bear his children. The reality of it should have terrified her. Instead, she felt calm, certain in a way she'd never been about anything. This was right. Lucien was right. She was meant for this life, this power, this immortal love that wasn't love, but something deeper and more primal. When she descended the grand staircase, Lucien waited at the bottom, dressed in formal black that made him look even more imposing. His silver eyes tracked her every movement, hungry and possessive. Seraphina. He breathed her name like a prayer, extending his hand. You're breathtaking. She placed her hand in his, feeling the familiar chill of his touch. Where are we going? To a place that's special to my kind. He led her through the manor, down corridors she'd never explored, to a door carved with those symbols that made her eyes hurt. Beyond this point, you'll be changed forever. Are you certain? Sera met his gaze steadily. I've never been more certain of anything. Lucian's smile could have melted glaciers. Then come, little queen. Let me make you mine. They descended into darkness lit by thousands of candles. The chamber was ancient, older than the manor above, older perhaps than human civilization. Rough stone walls covered in more of those strange symbols. A bed at the center, draped in crimson silk, surrounded by rose petals, and more candles than Sera could count. This is where vampire royalty consummates their bonds. Lucien's voice echoed in the vast space. Where we seal our connection through blood and pleasure. Tonight I'll mark you as mine. Fill you with my seed. Turn you into something more than human. Sera's breath came faster as the reality of what was about to happen crashed over her. I'm scared. Good. Fear makes the pleasure sweeter. He turned her to face him, his hands gentle despite the hunger in his eyes. But you trust me, don't you? Yes. And she did. Completely. Impossibly. She trusted this vampire king to transform her into something new. Then surrender to me, Seraphina. Let me show you what eternity feels like. His mouth claimed hers with devastating hunger, and Sera surrendered to the inevitable. His gelid hands stripped away the white dress, leaving her bare before him. He laid her down on crimson silk, his quicksilver eyes blazing, as he removed his own clothes with deliberate slowness. When he finally stood naked before her, Sera's breath caught. He was magnificent, all pale skin and carved muscle and power barely contained. His arousal stood proud and thick, and a flutter of nervousness joined her desire. Lucien knelt beside the bed, his hands sliding up her calves with agonizing slowness. "I'm going to worship every inch of you." His voice was rough, stripped of its usual control. "Learn every sound you make, every way to make you come apart." His mouth followed his hands, kissing her knees, her inner thighs getting closer to where she burned hottest. When he finally settled between her legs, Sera was already trembling with need. The first touch of his tongue made her cry out, her back arching off the silk. He worked her with centuries of skill, finding that bundle of nerves and circling it with perfect pressure. When he slid 2 fingers inside her, curling to hit that spot that made stars explode behind her eyes, Sera shattered. Her release crashed over her in waves, pleasure so intense it bordered on pain. Lucien worked her through it, prolonging each pulse until she was sobbing his name, begging for mercy. "That's one." He raised his head, his lips glistening. "I'm going to make you come at least 5 more times before I'm inside you." "I can't." Sera's voice was wrecked. "It's too much. You can and you will." His smile was wicked as he returned to his task, this time adding a 3rd finger that stretched her deliciously. "Because your body was made for this, Seraphina, made to take my pleasure and give it back tenfold." He proved his point, methodically driving her to peak after peak until she lost count. Her body became one continuous wave of sensation, building and cresting and building again. Only when she was begging incoherently, her thighs trembling with exhaustion and her body slick with sweat, did Lucien finally position himself above her. "Look at me." His command cut through the haze of pleasure. "I want to see your face when I claim you, when I make you mine forever." Sera's eyes locked on his as he pushed forward, the broad head of his length pressing against her entrance. The stretch was intense, bordering on painful as her body struggled to accommodate his size. "Breathe." Lucien's voice was strained with the effort of going slow. "You're so tight, so perfect. Just a little more." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he was fully seated inside her, his rigid length filling her completely. They both went still, adjusting to the overwhelming sensation of connection. "Mine." Lucien breathed, his hands framing her face. "Say it, Seraphina. Tell me you're mine. Yours." The word came out broken but certain. "I'm yours, Lucien, and I'm yours." His smile was triumphant and tender at once. "For all eternity." He began to move slow, deep strokes that set every nerve ending on fire. Sera wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him deeper, and he groaned at the sensation. The rhythm built gradually, each thrust harder than the last, until the bed was rocking beneath them, and Sera was crying out with every movement. "This is what you were made for." Lucien's voice was rough against her ear. "To take me, to carry my children, to rule beside me as queen." His hands slid between their bodies, finding her center, and Sera detonated around him. Her inner walls clenched hard enough to make him curse his control, finally fraying. "Yes." Lucien's hips pistoned faster, chasing his own release. "Come for me again. Show me how perfect you are." Sera shattered twice more before Lucien finally lost control. His fangs descended long and sharp, and as his release pulsed inside her, he struck. Pain and pleasure merged into something transcendent as he drank from her throat, his seed filling her while he fed. The venom in his bite spread through Sera's veins like liquid fire. Every cell in her body screamed and sang at once. She could feel her humanity slipping away, replaced by something stronger, something eternal. When Lucien finally pulled his fangs from her throat, sealing the wound with his tongue, Sera lay trembling beneath him. The transformation burned through her like wildfire, rewriting everything she'd ever been. "How do you feel?" Lucien's voice was gentle, his hand stroking her hair. "Different." Sera's own voice sounded strange to her ears, richer somehow, more resonant, strong. "The transformation takes 3 days to complete." He pulled out carefully, both of them groaning at the sensation. "For the next 72 hours, you'll experience changes. Enhanced senses, increased strength. The awakening of abilities you didn't know you possessed." He gathered her close, tucking her against his massive frame. "And then when it's complete, we'll have a coronation. Introduce you to vampire society as my queen." "What if I'm terrible at it?" Fear crept into her voice. "Impossible." Lucien's lips brushed her forehead. "You're a survivor, Seraphina. You'll adapt because that's what you do. They lay tangled together as the candles burned lower. Lucian explained what the next days would bring: the hunger for blood that would consume her, the sensitivity to sunlight that would force her to live in darkness, the way her body would need to relearn everything from breathing to walking. It sounds terrifying. It would be if you were facing it alone. His arms tightened around her. But you're not. I'll be with you every moment, teaching you, protecting you, helping you become the queen I know you can be. Sera believed him. She'd surrendered everything: her humanity, her old life, her very soul. And in return, she'd gained power beyond measure and a mate who would never leave her. The transformation was agony. The transformation took 72 hours of agony. Bones shattered and reformed. Senses exploded: every sound, magnified every scent, overwhelming every touch like razors against raw nerves. Sera heard whispers through stone walls, saw shapes in absolute darkness, tasted phantom blood on empty air. Between the physical torment came worse hallucinations, where her father died endlessly, where Cass grew old alone, where she became the monster of her nightmares, all fangs and hunger and pale inhuman beauty. Through every scream, every convulsion, every moment she begged for death. Lucian stayed. His voice became her lifeline in the chaos. You're not a monster. Monsters don't feel fear. The fact that you're afraid proves you'll never lose yourself. On the third day, silence. Sera opened eyes now flecked with silver and felt strength humming through every cell power that could crush stone or move faster than human sight could track. On the third day, Sera emerged from the chrysalis of her humanity. She opened eyes that now held flecks of silver among the green, looked down at hands that glowed with inner light, felt strength thrumming through every cell power that could crush stone or move with speed that made her invisible. She was vampire, immortal, queen. But as she examined her new form, Lucian placed a hand on her still flat stomach. There's something else. His voice held wonder. Something I didn't expect so soon. What? You're carrying my children, Seraphina. Twins. I can feel them already. Two strong heartbeats where there should be one. Sera's hand covered his feeling for what he sensed. Twins, a boy and a girl. His smile was radiant. You've given me everything I asked for and more. The coronation would have to wait. Sera's pregnancy progressed at supernatural speed. Within 2 weeks, she was visibly showing. Within a month, she looked 6 months pregnant. The twins growing inside her were powerful, demanding, draining her newborn vampire strength faster than it could regenerate. You need to feed more, Lucian insisted, bringing her warm blood in crystal glasses. The babies are taking everything you have. I'm trying. Sera sipped the blood-fighting nausea. But it's never enough. It was during one of these feeding sessions that Vivian made her move. The dark-haired vampire entered Sera's chamber without knocking, her amber eyes fixed on Sera's swollen belly with undisguised hatred. How touching. Vivian's voice dripped venom, the human broodmare heavy with the precious heirs. Get out. Sera's voice held more power than she expected, layered with something primal. You're not welcome here. Oh, but I am. Vivian's smile was sharp. I've come to deliver a message. From Lord Marcus of the Southern Territories. He challenges Lucian's right to rule. And by ancient law, he challenges you. Me, trial by combat. Vivian circled like a predator. 30 days from now. You against his champion. To prove you're worthy of being queen. I'm pregnant. Sera stood, her hand protective on her belly. No one would expect me to fight like this. Ancient law doesn't care about your condition. Vivian's smile widened. Refuse and Lucien loses his territories. Accept and you'll likely die, along with those precious heirs. Sera felt cold fury building. This was a trap. Vivian and this Marcus had orchestrated it perfectly. Pregnant and newly turned, she stood no chance in combat. When Lucian learned of the challenge, his rage shook the manor. They can't do this. He paced like a caged lion. You're pregnant with my children. The law has provisions. The law is clear. Sera had researched it herself in his vast library. Any challenge to a new queen must be answered within 60 days of coronation. We haven't had the coronation yet, so technically I'm still just your intended. The challenge is legal. Then we refuse. I'll go to war with Marcus if I have to. And how many of your people will die? Sera touched his face, forcing him to look at her. How many innocent vampires will be caught in the crossfire of your war? Lucian's hands clenched. I won't let you fight. I can't lose you. You won't. Sera's voice held certainty she didn't quite feel. Train me. We have 30 days. Train me to fight, and I'll show them what a queen looks like. The next month was brutal. Despite her pregnancy, Sera trained with General Thorn Lucien's Master of Arms. The old vampire pushed her mercilessly, teaching her to use her newborn speed and strength to turn her pregnancy into an advantage rather than a weakness. They'll underestimate you. Thorn circled her in the training yard. Use that. Make them think you're helpless. Then strike. Sera learned quickly. Her body transformed and enhanced, adapted with preternatural speed. And as the twins grew inside her, she discovered something unexpected. She could draw on their power, channel their supernatural strength when her own failed. But it was draining. Every training session left her exhausted, barely able to climb the stairs to her chamber. Lucian watched with barely controlled terror, knowing he couldn't stop her, but fearing what the cost might be. It was 2 weeks before the combat that they discovered the full extent of the conspiracy. Sera was researching combat techniques in the library when she overheard voices from the corridor outside. Vivian's silk-over-steel tone and a man's voice she didn't recognize. She pressed herself against the wall, her vampire hearing picking up every word. The plan proceeds as discussed. The man's voice was cultured, refined, southern accent. Once she's dead in the arena, Lucian will be vulnerable, broken. That's when we strike. And you're certain your champion can defeat her? Vivian sounded skeptical. She's showing unexpected strength. She's 7 months pregnant with twins. Marcus's voice held dark amusement. My champion is 5 centuries old and a trained warrior. It will be slaughter, and afterward, the northern territories are mine. Lucian is yours. Though I suspect he'll need significant persuading to accept you after watching his precious queen die. Sera's hand clenched on the doorframe, wood splintering under her grip. This wasn't just about the territories. This was assassination. Coup. An attempt to destroy everything Lucian had built. She had to tell him, had to warn him. But as she moved to leave, another voice joined the conversation, one that made her blood run cold. Chichi, where are you, Cass? Her brother's voice coming from Vivian's phone on speaker. We have your brother, Seraphina. Marcus's voice carried clearly. Such a brilliant young man. It would be a shame if something happened to him before his graduation. The threat was clear. Fight and die or refuse and Cass dies. Sera's hand went to her swollen belly, feeling the twins moving inside her. She had impossible choices. Her own life, her children's lives, her brother's life, Lucian's kingdom. There had to be another way. She found Lucien in his study and told him everything. His face went white with rage. They have Cass. Her voice broke. They'll kill him if I don't fight. And they'll kill me in the arena. No, Lucian's hand slammed into his desk, shattering it. We'll find another way. We'll rescue Cass. There's no time. The combat is in 2 weeks. We need a plan, not rage. Sera took his face in her hands, forcing him to focus. Listen to me. We're going to survive this, all of us. But I need you to trust me. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that Marcus and Vivian have made a fatal mistake. They've underestimated what a mother will do to protect her children. Over the next 2 weeks, they prepared, not just for combat, but for war. Lucian called in favors from his allied lords, gathered evidence of the conspiracy, and most importantly, sent his best trackers to locate Cass. They found him 3 days before the combat. Held in a warehouse on the edge of Marcus's territory, the rescue was swift and brutal. 6 vampires dead, Hess terrified but alive. Chihid stared at Sera when she appeared, taking in her pale skin, her silver-flecked eyes, her pregnant belly. What are you? Something new? Sera pulled him into a hug, careful of her strength. Something strong enough to protect you. The day of the trial arrived. The arena was ancient, carved into Montana bedrock, 2,000 feet underground. Hundreds of vampires filled the stands, come to watch their new queen prove herself or die trying. Sera stood in the center of the sand, 7 months pregnant, facing Marcus's champion. He was enormous, scarred with eyes that held nothing but cold calculation. Begin. The ancient vampire serving as judge dropped his hand. The champion moved with speed that should have been impossible to track. But Sera's newborn eyes caught every movement. She dodged, using her smaller size and pregnancy to make herself a difficult target. The crowd murmured. She was supposed to be helpless, terrified, easy prey. Instead, she was dancing, evading, waiting for her moment. It came when the champion overextended, cocky in his certainty of victory. Sera's hand shot out, catching his wrist. Power flooded through her, borrowed from the twins, amplified by desperation. She threw him. 300 pounds of vampire warrior sailed through the air and crashed into the arena wall, hard enough to crack stone. The crowd went silent. Sera stood in the center of the arena, one hand on her swollen belly, the other extended in challenge. Her voice rang out, layered with power that made even the ancient judges flinch. I am Seraphina Ashford, Queen of the Northern Territories, mother of the future, and I will not be cowed by cowards who threaten children. She turned to where Marcus sat in the stands, his face pale with shock. You orchestrated this challenge. You kidnapped my brother. You conspired to murder me and seize these territories. Did you think I wouldn't know? Did you think I wouldn't fight back? The champion struggled to his feet, but Sera was already moving. Newborn speed combined with mother's fury, she struck him 3 times before he could raise his hands. Broke his arm, shattered his knee, drove him to the ground. Yield. Her voice was command. Or die. The champion looked to Marcus for guidance, but Marcus was already backing toward the exit, realizing his plan had failed catastrophically. Lucian was faster. He materialized in Marcus's path, silver eyes blazing. Going somewhere, Lord Marcus. What followed wasn't combat, it was execution. Lucian's century of stored rage, his terror for Sera, his fury at the threat to his children, all poured into violence that left Marcus broken on the ground. Not dead. That would be too merciful. Alive. To face judgment. The trial was held immediately in the same arena. Witnesses came forward, servants who'd overheard plans, financial records showing payments. Most damningly, Cass himself testifying about his kidnapping. Vivian tried to run. Sera stopped her. The 2 women faced each other in the corridor outside the arena. Vivian's amber eyes blazed with hatred. You were supposed to die. All of you were supposed to die, but we didn't. Sera's voice was calm. Because you made the mistake of threatening my family, my mate, my children, and now you'll pay for it. The fight was brief. Vivian had centuries of experience, but Sera had desperation, newborn strength, and the power of 2 supernatural children lending her their force. When it was over, Vivian lay broken at Sera's feet. I yield. The words came out choked. I yield. Sera stood over her, breathing hard, one hand on her belly where the twins kicked frantically. She could kill Vivian, would be justified in doing so. But she was a queen, and queens dispense justice, not revenge. The High Council of North American Vampires arrived 3 days later. 3 ancient vampires, each over 1,000 years old, come to pass judgment on the conspiracy. The trial lasted 6 hours. Evidence was presented systematically. Financial records showing Marcus had paid Vivian $2 million to orchestrate the challenge. Testimony from the champion, who'd been promised land in exchange for killing Sera. Witness after witness describing the plot. The verdict was unanimous. Marcus guilty of conspiracy to commit regicide, kidnapping, and attempted genocide. Sentenced permanent exile to the Arctic prison colony. All titles and lands forfeit. Vivian guilty of conspiracy to commit regicide and treason. Sentence 200 years imprisonment reduced to 20 for cooperation. The 8 other conspirators received sentences ranging from 50 to 200 years. But more importantly, the council enacted reforms. All territorial disputes would now require council oversight. Weapons trafficking would be registered, and each territory would have human representatives to advise on mortal affairs. Sera watched from Lucien's side, her hand in his, feeling the twins moving inside her. Justice had been served. The system had worked, and she was still standing. 2 weeks after the trial, Sera went into labor. It was violent, fast. The twins weren't patient. 14 hours of agony that Lucian endured beside her, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, looking more terrified than she'd ever seen him. When the first baby emerged, the ancient midwife gasped. A boy, white blonde hair, silver-flecked green eyes, tiny fangs already visible. And when he cried, every vampire in the manor felt the pulse of power that emanated from him. Dorian. Sera breathed, cradling her son, Dorian Ashford. 10 minutes later, his sister followed. Identical coloring, identical eyes. But where Dorian's cry had been power demons was music. Literally. The sound resonated through the manor like bells, beautiful and eerie. Twins. Lucian held both babies, his expression transformed by wonder. A son and a daughter. You've given me everything, Seraphina. Everything and more. The coronation happened 6 months later. Sera stood before the assembled vampire lords, dressed in crimson and gold, the twins in her arms. Lucien beside her, his hand on her waist. I present to you Seraphina Ashford. Lucian's voice rang through the great hall. My mate, your queen, mother of the future. The hall erupted in applause. Real this time, earned, because they'd seen her fight, seen her survive, seen her dispense justice and mercy in equal measure. She'd proven herself worthy not by birth, but by strength. As Lucian placed the crown on her head, Sera looked out at the assembled vampires and felt something she hadn't felt in 8 years. Peace. 1 year later. Sera stood in the nursery watching Dorian and Damon sleep in their cribs. At 1 year old, they were the size of 3-year-old humans, growing fast, growing strong. The door opened softly. Cass entered, his girlfriend Emily behind him. Chi. He still sometimes slipped into Vietnamese when emotional. They're getting so big. Sera smiled, wrapping an arm around her brother. He knew everything now. About vampires, about her transformation, about the twins' supernatural nature, and he'd accepted it all with surprising grace. How's Princeton graduating summa cum laude next month? Cass grinned, thanks to a certain anonymous donor who kept paying my tuition. Emily touched one of Damon's tiny hands, marveling as the baby's fingers curled around hers. She's so beautiful. She has her father's temper, though. Sera laughed. Last week, she shattered every window in the East Wing when she didn't get her bottle fast enough. And Dorian, he levitated his crib yesterday. Cass shook his head in wonder. Your kids are going to be terrifying when they're teenagers. Terrifyingly powerful. Lucian entered, kissing Sera's temple, and terrifyingly loved. Later that night, after Cass and Emily had left, Sera found herself being led through the manor by Lucian. Where are we going? Somewhere. I should have taken you months ago. They drove into town. Into the part of town Sera used to know intimately. Past her old apartment building. Past the places she'd worked. And stopped outside Lou's diner. It looked different. Renovated. Clean. Through the windows, Sera could see it was busy. Thriving. I didn't sell it. Lucian opened her door. I upgraded it. Better wages. Benefits. Safe working conditions. For people like you used to be. They entered the diner together. Old Lou was still there in booth 4, but his hands didn't tremble anymore. The waitress who brought him coffee was smiling. Real smile. Not the practiced one Sera remembered wearing like armor. Can I help you? The waitress asked, not recognizing the elegant woman in designer clothes as one of her own. Sera pulled off her sunglasses, revealing silver-flecked green eyes. Do you remember me? The waitress's eyes widened. Seraphina. But you disappeared. We thought, I found something better. Sera's smile was genuine. And I came back to make sure you could too. She spent an hour talking with the staff, learning their names, their stories, announcing a new scholarship program funded by the Ashford Foundation. Full tuition for any employee's family member who wanted to attend college. As they left, Sera looked back at the diner one last time. That had been her life, exhaustion and desperation and slow death by 1,000 tiny cuts. Now she was something else entirely. The final scene took place on the manor balcony overlooking the Montana mountains. The sun had just set, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Sera stood with Lucien's arms around her, his hands on her stomach, where a third child was already growing. Another girl, due in 6 months. Any regrets? Lucien's voice was soft against her ear. Sera thought about it honestly. About the humanity she'd lost. The sunlight she'd never see again. The mortality she'd abandoned. About the brother who was graduating summa cum laude. The staff at Lou's who now had hope. The twins sleeping peacefully in their cribs. The mate whose cold hands had pulled her from drowning. Only that I waited so long to believe I deserved this. Lucian turned her to face him, silver eyes meeting silver-flecked green. You deserve everything. You always did. I just had to show you. He kissed her as the stars emerged overhead. A king and his queen. A vampire and his mate. Two souls who'd found each other across centuries and class divides, and every barrier that should have kept them apart. Below them, the territories thrived. Reformed laws protected both vampires and humans. The conspiracy had been crushed. Justice had been served. And in the nursery, 2 powerful children slept, the future of their kind. Sera pulled back from the kiss, looking up at Lucien with eyes that held eternity. Show me more, she whispered. And he did. For all the centuries to come, he showed her everything. Power and pleasure, danger and triumph. The full weight of ruling an empire and the simple joy of watching their children grow. Because that's what being a queen meant. Not just surviving, not just enduring, but conquering, building, creating something that would last beyond memory. And Seraphina Ashford, once a broke waitress from Wyoming, now a mortal queen mother of the future mate to a king, had finally found the life she'd been searching for. One that didn't just promise possibility, one that delivered eternity.